This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Absolutely lovely to have your company. Another huge show this week. First up, why 1% could be make or break for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, but even more could be 0.1%. Plus, what is Grace Tame's real relationship with the Murdoch media? I'll give you the inside story behind that. And what's it like to be cancelled? Imagine being cancelled for something that you didn't even know that you'd done. All that and more coming up. First up, well, it hasn't been a great start to the week for Anthony Albanese. Australia Day, of course, happened over the weekend, and so did a Newspoll that showed that Peter Dutton was starting the year ahead. The coalition is up 51 to 49, two-party preferred against the Labor Party. And that is an increase of 1% from the 50-50 that Albo managed to close the year at. And I can guarantee you there would have been plenty of people in the government who would have been very relieved that it was 50-50 and nothing any worse. Well, worse has come, and now the coalition has just nosed in front. But it might not be all bad news for Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party, because in the same Newspoll, it showed that a majority of Australians now expected the coalition to win the next election. Now, that is not a majority of Australians saying that they are going to vote for the coalition. That is a majority of Australians saying they think everybody else is. So this is a slightly different type of news poll. Instead of just says, how are you going to vote? They're actually asking, what do you think will happen, regardless of how you vote? So, of course, you have cynical Labor voters. Yes, they are out there saying, oh, yeah, look, I don't want it to happen, but I think that Peter Dutton's going to get in. Now, this is actually better news for Labor than people saying that they're just going to vote the other way. So actually having people expect the opposition to win is, believe it or not, probably what Labor wants. The last thing that you want going into an election is everyone thinking that you're going to win. So it doesn't really matter how you vote. You can sort of have your cake and eat it too. You cast a protest vote against the government to say that you're so unhappy with how they're going, and you're going to send a message to the Lodge, and they'll listen, they'll get a bit scared, and they'll do better next time. Now, this is what happened to Jeff Kennett in 1999. No one thought he was going to lose that election as Premier of Victoria after just 2 terms. He just won a second term in what was effectively a landslide. And yet, because everyone thought he was going to get in, there's a massive protest vote, and Steve Bracks just squeaks over the line. Everyone in politics had their heads spin at that result, and it made them take the prospect of a shock loss very, very, very seriously. Now, if that was to happen, that would be unprecedented since the Second World War. For the best part of a century, every first-term Australian government has gotten a second term, even when the government has chopped off the head of its own Prime Minister. That happened with Kevin Rudd when Julia Gillard got in, albeit as minority government, and it happened with the Coalition as soon as they got in after that, when Tony Abbott got rolled and Malcolm Turnbull, again, just squeaked through, but squeaked through. And you will have a lot of people I know in the Labor Party say, actually, we want people to think that Dutton could win, because if they actually think he's going to get in, that's going to make them more likely to vote for us. And again, what you don't want is that protest vote getting out of control, apart from anything else. That's why by-elections always go against the government, or they did until the Aston by-election. That's another once-in-a-century event. But people think, well, I can send the government a message, but not have to worry about actually changing the government. So again, I can, stick the middle finger up to them, but actually I want them to stay there. I just want them to pay more attention. So having more people think that Peter Dutton and the Coalition are going to win the next election could actually be good for Labor, because people will actually say, well, hang on a minute. Do we really want that? Do we want those 7 nuclear reactors, or do we want to never see the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags at a press conference ever again? Maybe they will. But of course, this was the strategy when everyone thought that Peter Dutton was unelectable, that Peter Dutton was about as electable as, say, I don't know, Donald Trump. Ruh-roh. So that hasn't gone particularly well. But nonetheless, it is not as bad for the government as you might think. What is better for the government, though, is not that 1% that the coalition has put on it over Christmas, but the 0.1% difference between what the RBA and everyone else thought inflation was going to do and what it actually did. And, you know, they say a week's a long time in politics. They say what a difference a day makes. Well, this is the difference that 0.1% makes. Now, most people thought that inflation would go up by about 2.5% in the December quarter. And I swear to God, I'm going to make this interesting. I'm going to make it sexy. I'm going to make it sing, right? Most people thought it would go up by about 2.5%, right? The markets, you know, all the sort of people who make their livings predicting these sorts of things. And even that would have been the lowest in 4 years. That would be the lowest figure since 2021, and that would be good news. But you know what it did? That little number, that little digit, God bless it, went up by 2.4%. So 0.1% lower. So that means that not only was everyone expecting inflation to be much, much, much better than it has been at any time in the past 4 years, but it did just a tiny, teeny, weensy bit better than that. And that means that the RBA has a tiny, teeny, weensy bit more of an incentive to cut rates. And it could do that as early as next month. It could do that as early as mid-Feb. I think February 18 is when the RBA meets. So that means that Albo could actually get a rate cut in the middle of an election campaign. He might even, if he has balls of steel. And again, as I've often said, his overconfidence is both his best asset and his worst problem. But he could even roll the dice, call an election, as I predicted last week, not go back to Parliament, not have to deliver a budget deficit. And then in the middle of a campaign, boom, the clouds part, the RBA hands down that rate cut. So again, that number, that 0.1 between the expected inflation rate and what actually came down could be even more important than the 1% the coalition just went up by. Watch this space. But now I want to talk about a different number that occurred in politics, and that is the number that Grace Tame did on the PM during an Australia Day event at the Lodge, or an Australia Day Eve event. I think it was the Saturday before Australia Day, Saturday the 25th. Now, this has been obviously what everybody's talking about, which is precisely, I suspect, Grace Tame's intention. But Grace Tame, who was, of course, a Young Australian of the Year winner herself, she rocked up to the Lodge to this formal event wearing a Fuck Murdoch t-shirt. Now, she didn't specify which Murdoch, but I suspect it was... I don't think it was Howling Mad Murdoch from the A-Team. I suspect it might have been the great patriarch of News Corp Australia, Rupert Murdoch, or indeed maybe even the bloke who actually runs the joint, Lachlan Murdoch. I'm not sure if Grace got the memo that, in fact, there's been a bit of a sort of, change of hands at the top recently. But anyway, it's not an uncommon sentiment among the activist left, and needless to say, it's a sentiment I've heard many times throughout my career. In fact, when I was a young left-wing tearaway socialist, it's probably a sentiment I held myself. But let's get back down to what happened. So Grace Tame at this function at the Lodge wears this t-shirt, big letters, capitals, F Murdoch. And of course, she is one of the many people lined up to shake hands with the PM, and the PM kind of has to shake hands with her and move on. And everyone's got a photo of her in this t-shirt, grinning like a Cheshire cat, looking proud as punch, and the PM sort of trying to look anywhere else. Now, this seemed to me passing strange for a number of reasons. and one is an absolute killer, which I'll get up to. Firstly, I've got no problem with Grace Tame saying whatever she wants, and I've got no problem with people, even if they're saying things I disagree with or whatever, expressing themselves. And again, I was a young left-wing tearaway, shouting and chanting all sorts of things. I dare say I probably shouted fuck everyone at some point throughout my activist years. I've calmed down quite a bit and now occupy the sensible centre with which I enlighten all my fellow Australians every week on this podcast. But the question is, what are you actually trying to achieve and who are you actually helping? Now, Grace Tame was, at least, I believe, a supporter of Anthony Albanese. Certainly, they seem to share many common interests, including the destruction of Scott Morrison. Now, it would appear Anthony Albanese is in the same camp as Scott Morrison, because not only did her wearing that T-shirt get him into sort of all sorts of trouble, and mean that everyone was talking about that and talking about what his response to it was and whether or not he shared that view or whether or not he condemned it, because of course, according to the left's own rule, you can't just say nothing about anything. If you do not, stand up and condemn something, it is assumed that you support it. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. It's the company you keep, and all that palaver. So instead of talking about the government's policies and what it's going to do for people in the middle of what is effectively a faux election campaign, the PM is having to fend off all sorts of questions about Grace Tame and her T-shirt. And of course, it's probably pretty likely to make a fairly large section of the Australian media and its audience think, hang on a minute, if she thinks that and the PM standing next to her, does the PM think that? Because quite clearly, a very large number of Australians actually like what News Corp, which is my employer, has to offer. And when they're offering me, it's no wonder, because it's a bloody hot product. So clearly, most, or at least many Australians, do not agree with this sentiment. And even those who do probably wouldn't be too rapt with the way it was being expressed. And this was all Anthony Albanese said. He basically said, having been, of course, criticised from one side for daring to be seen with Grace Tame while she was wearing the T-shirt, which in fact he had virtually no choice about whatsoever. There was pretty much nothing he could do. But he still cops it anyway from the right. And then, of course, he says, well, no, I think that was disrespectful and I think we should have, I support freedom of speech, but I think we should have political debate in a respectful way. And I think that Grace Tame, detracted attention from the people who this year, the Australia Day honours were supposed to celebrate, which self-evidently it did, because that's all we're talking about, including me. So pretty mild response from Albo. But of course, no, now he gets attacked by the left, and not just anyone on the left, but of course Grace Tame herself, who suddenly, writing for Crikey, says that, the PM's government has been spineless and cowardly, and I don't know, I just read the Daily Mail version, but apparently she didn't like it very much. So now the PM's already been attacked by the right for Grace Tame's stunt, and now he's being attacked by Grace Tame herself from the left for daring to say that maybe that wasn't the best time and place to wear that T-shirt. So when people talk about the left eating itself, the left destroying itself, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. It looks like the hard left attacking the moderate centre left for not being left-wing enough at a time when the rest of the electorate is punishing that same government and that same PM for being too left-wing. That is what the left cannibalising, eating, consuming, destroying, engorging itself, that's what it looks like. And it is just, for someone like me and many, many people in the party, in the centre left or in the centre of politics, we just look at this stuff and we go, this is a political apocalypse. This is people torching the village in order to save it. So that is the sort of political outcome of what Grace Tame has done. And again, I'm all for free speech And even if I wasn't, I'd still give Grace Tame a free pass because after what she's been through, she can say whatever the hell she wants. But if this was her desired impact, I'm not sure if she is Labor or the left's best friend. What is more interesting, however, is Grace Tame's own history with the Murdoch Media organisation in Australia. Because Grace Tame first came to public attention solely as the result of a News Corp, a Murdoch Media campaign. A campaign that she worked hand in glove with the organisation on. Nina Funnell, who is a friend of mine or someone I've worked with who I really love and respect, is a campaigner and a journalist for News Corp, freelance like me, works a lot for news.com.au. And she is a tireless advocate for sexual assault victims or survivors. And she met Grace Tame in 2017, wanted to do a story on her for news.com.au, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and was told by the lawyers she couldn't because this archaic law in Tasmania where Grace Tame's assault occurred meant that victims of sexual assault couldn't be identified, even if they wanted to be identified. So perhaps a well-intentioned law to protect their privacy, but for people who wanted to speak out and campaign on these issues and change laws, including the one that said that they couldn't speak out, this actually completely hogtied them. And so Nina Funnell started a campaign called Let Her Speak, which she worked with Grace Tame on in order to get Grace Tame's identity finally publicly revealed, to give her a platform. And News Corp, news.com.au, and the Hobart Mercury, also owned by Rupert Murdoch, worked tirelessly until that law was changed and Grace Tame could finally be revealed as Grace Tame. It was that campaign which made Grace Tame a public figure. It gave her the platform to raise these issues. And indeed, that campaign was given the 2019 News Corp Award for Campaign of the Year at the News Awards, which are run by News Corp, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And Grace Tame was at that event. I know, because I was at that event. And I think that was the last time I actually saw and spoke to Nina face to face. And I congratulated her on what a fantastic campaign it had been and said it was incredible. And Nina was just so relieved. And Grace Tame was there next to her. I can't remember if I actually met Grace as well, but she was right there. Even if she wasn't right there, I still would have seen her at that event because she spoke at it. She addressed those News Corp Awards saying what an incredible campaign it had been and what incredibly good work it had done and how proud she was to be associated with it. Not so much anymore, it seems. But again, that was 5 years ago. People changed their minds. People's political views changed. Maybe Grace is embarrassed by that now. Maybe she's forgotten it. Maybe, I don't know. Whatever. So I'm not having a go at Grace Tame. She can say, think or do whatever she wants, and she doesn't need my permission to do so. But I do think it is passing strange that if it wasn't for the Murdoch press, Grace Tame would not have the platform and the profile to rock up to the lodge wearing a T-shirt saying "fuck Murdoch." Well, my guest this week is someone I'm incredibly excited to have with us. I am totally fangirling right now. I am wigging out. She is one of the biggest stars in Australian music. She was someone who I absolutely idolised as I was growing up. Her name is Deborah Conway. She was a former lead singer of Do Re Mi with this trailblazing band in Australia in the 1980s. I remember her for a solo career, Conway 2.0, which produced such incredible hits as It's Only the Beginning and my personal favourite, Release Me. And she's someone who I think needs a bit of a release right now, because in the middle of the sort of aftermath and all the fury and politics and protests that came following the October 7 terror attacks and everything that flowed from that, Deborah Conway found herself cancelled. She was someone who had been an icon and still is an icon of the Australian music scene, someone who, dare I say, like myself, saw herself as of the sort of, progressive left, right on, thinks all the right things about everybody, a nice person and all of that. And suddenly she found that appearances were being denied her. People were no longer booking her or talking to her. And I wanted to talk to her about what that feels like, what it's like to be cancelled, to be punished for something you don't even really know that you've done. But enough from me. Here she is right now on The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Deborah Conway, welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Pretty good. It's nice to be with you, Joe. What an amazing opportunity. I'm also a
Stop
fan
it.
of yours.
No, you're
I
not. So I just honestly, I am. If anyone is watching right now, I'm already starting to blush. But it is just I'm
blushing.
absolutely thrilled and honoured to have you. I've been up all night watching your music videos for about the 50 billionth time.
You've been stalking me. That's what
I
they
have
call
been.
it.
I have been stalking you. I've been cyber stalking you. But I wanted to just. I really felt, and as you know, I've been trying to get you on the show for ages because this is something really, really important to me and something that's very, very troubling to me. And I think it's something that everyone is sort of waking up to. But this idea that artists, public figures, whoever it might be, need to be cancelled, deplatformed, whatever you call it, if they have a contrary view to whatever the current sort of zeitgeist is. And you, unbeknownst to me when I was growing up and a kid and listening to you, but you are Jewish. Unsurprisingly, you support the state of Israel and its right to exist. But leaving all that aside, take us through the first moment when you realised that these things that you'd always take for granted and never thought were an issue suddenly became an issue when it came to your music and your art and your sort of public life.
Well, I guess, for me it started with the shock of the celebrations that happened in Western Sydney on October the 8th after this appalling massacre on the 7th of October. There seemed to be no end of glee to what had happened. And I was really so surprised. And I think a lot of people in the Jewish community, I mean, pretty much everyone I knew, was quite shocked about how this fully formed creature of anti-Semitism had sprung forth from the loins of this massacre. Anyway, we put some stuff on our social media to kind of push back and present another view. It didn't necessarily go very far. I never know what social media does. It doesn't seem to reach that many people.
It's incredibly understated and incredibly overstated at the same time. The impact you think it's not having any impact, whereas other things are going on. But anyway, continue.
But what happened I think it was around the 26th of November that Mushroom Records celebrated its 50th anniversary, and we'd been invited to perform a song on that stage at Rod Laver Arena in front of 15,000 people. It was broadcast to around 1 million people, and we chose to wear white suits with blue shirts. I wore a very large Magen David, and Willie wore a yarmulke. And I just said, look, Michael, referring to Michael Gudinski, had hated my outfit, which I wore in the video clip for It's Only the Beginning, but I think he would have loved this outfit. That's all I said. It was pretty benign. From that, we got a lot of support from a lot of support from the broader community and from the Jews. And then there was the start of the real hate campaign, and the beginning, the first mention of us as being genocide supporters, which was really shocking. I mean, really, there's nothing more shocking than being called someone who supports genocide. It's so horrific, such a horrific idea.
So there was an appearance on the ABC, I think, that you were scheduled to give, and then a producer got in contact and said, "Well, actually, sorry,
It
you're a bit."
happened. It happened after the Patricia Karvelas Radio National interview, which was on around the 15th of December, I think, and that was supposedly a conversation between the comparisons of what Willie and I had worn at the Rod Laver Arena with what some of the actors wore at the opening night of the Seagull.
The actors were wearing the keffiyeh, the Palestinian
Correct.
scarf, and yep.
Yeah. And so I did this interview with Patricia Karvelas, and during the cut and thrust of a live interview, she was telling me that the IDF were responsible for all of these terrible deaths in Gaza, and of course there was a lot of death. It was shocking, and she mentioned how about the children, and I, in trying to point out that Hamas are very responsible for putting guns in the hands of underage people, underage soldiers, really bear a huge amount of responsibility for this tragedy. And of course, a number of words were taken, 7 words were taken out of the context from that conversation, and then everybody just went to town. And I went from being, deified to being vilified. People were writing just horrendous things.
I suppose aside from that, so you're sort of watching yourself become almost leave your own body. So suddenly the Deborah Conway you were and you always thought you were is this other thing that's being sort of tossed around by others in the cybersphere.
It wasn't immediately apparent to me. I mean, I didn't think that I'd said anything, out of the mainstream opinion of how one would interpret the events of October 7 and up until that point. And so I was quite surprised. My daughter said to me, you're cancelled now. And I said, really? I mean, but I just expressed a view of, that Hamas is a terrorist group and they shouldn't do these things and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, she was right. So it became very apparent that that people didn't want to know about me, that either they subscribed to the idea that I was in fact a supporter of genocide, or they were just terrified of straying beyond what the tribe believed, or they were terrified of being targeted by the tribe for standing up for the other opinion. So pick your poison. And it was a snowball effect.
So what sort of started to happen? I know, I know that suddenly appearances got cancelled. You had a musical appearance on the ABC that was where they said, "Sorry, you're now persona non grata because of your views." Just talk us through how something like that.
I don't think they were that specific, Joe. It would have been problematic for them, but they did. Someone said that the publicist that was, I put a book out on October the 3rd. On October the 4th, we launched a show in Melbourne called Songs from the Book of Life, which was a 3-dimensional musical based on that. And the ABC interview was to promote some shows that we had, some extra shows that we were doing in Melbourne. And the producer contacted the publicist and said, look, Deborah's too hot at the moment. We can't have her on. And we weren't talking, we were talking about promoting a show on the ABC, on the national broadcaster, and it seemed completely crazy that one couldn't do that because of this pile-on that was that had started happening. So we contacted a journalist a friendly journalist at another publication, who rang the ABC and said, "Oh, I hear Deborah Conway's been cancelled from this interview because of being too hot." And within an hour or two, the ABC had contacted the publicist and said, "No,
there's been some misunderstanding. No.
It's just a misunderstanding, and the producer was away, and
I mean, this is your livelihood. It's both what you need to survive and to get by, but it's also, something obviously that is integral to to who you are. And I know enough musicians. I'm a failed musician myself to know that, you know, if someone is stopping you from doing, or there is that threat of you not being able to perform again or not being able to work again, that must send a sort of existential shiver down your spine. How did it feel when you sort of felt that suddenly everything's on the line?
Oh my goodness, it's been such a tough few years. I mean, you know, I guess sometime back, you know, there was streaming, and then there was COVID, and then there was,
Yep.
you know, the beginnings of AI, and now there's this. It's kind of like the 1-2
That's right.
punch, which I
know
keep rolling.
I know the
with.
Jews are more the Old Testament than New Testament, but this is very much the four horsemen of the apocalypse. This is, you know, revelations here.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, so look, you know, we are self-employed, so you know we don't have anyone else to make happy. Technically, I don't have a record company or a publisher, music publisher at any rate. I do have a book publisher, and they've been fantastic. And look, and there's been lots of people that have been fantastic. And perhaps I should say also that the ABC did come back to me with a very appropriate apology note after that incident. So I should credit them for that. You know, like, I do believe that there are a lot of people torn about this. And I think that there are many more people that are just trying to stay above the fray because they can see what happens when they get involved. And it's really nasty. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they concur with all of the stuff that is being propagated about me and about us. Nevertheless, we will continue because we can. We're independent. We will record a new record. We'll figure out how to release that in this strange world where no one actually has a CD player, and we're just too old to be, you know, selling.
I still wonder about that.
I did come up with a very good idea yesterday, which I won't tell you right now, but I was quite pleased with myself. I'm hard to defeat. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I have bad days. I can't, you know, there are days where I just cannot believe the world that I'm now living in. And you know, it would be wonderful if there was a cohort of my peers that would stand up publicly and say, hey, this is just wrong. It's not right. I've worked with her. She really doesn't support genocide. I know her.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
that's right.
that'd be good.
Okay.
So far, you know,
I'm not a genocidal Nazi. I vote for the Labor Party, for God's sake.
They're keeping their head down.
And again, I think there is, and perhaps, you know, maybe it's just foolishness or whatever, but, you know, I am one of those few stupid people who do stick their head above the parapet, because I think there has been this really kind of dark cloud of, you know, the cliche is sort of cancel culture, but this sort of censoriousness, puritanical censoriousness that has emerged among the left, which I sort of never thought that the left would end up becoming, you know, apart from, you know, in Soviet Russia, would end up. Why
wouldn't you think that? I mean, they've got a very good history of that. It's like it happens on both sides. It does. Yes. It happens on all sides when, you know, there are extremists who have to stick to an ideology, who have lost the ability to think outside the square, who are terrified of being challenged. And so it's absolute. The left is not immune to it. It's just that they've been given a free pass for such a long time.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess, and again, it's probably your fault as well, because I grew up in the 90s where it seemed like a happy time where everyone was sort of crazy. We were all, you know, getting drunk and smoking bongs and having sex, and, you know, you'd go to the occasional protest.
I don't think you can conflate that with being, you know, on the left side of politics or the right side of politics. I believe that the behaviours that we all exhibited in the 90s was about, you know, individualism.
Yeah, maybe I just got confused.
I actually think that's, you know, that's where we still are today, Joe.
Yeah.
That's where I am. And I'm happy to pick and choose and figure it out as I go. And, you know, if I think it's wrong, I'll call it out.
Well, God love you for it. And I'm very glad that you are where you are today. And I'm very glad that you chose to be on this podcast and we got to have this chat. Deborah Conway, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute treat.
Thank you very much for having me, Joe. You're a champ.
And that's all we have time for this week. Thanks so much for your company. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We'll be back next week with more astounding revelations of what's really happening below the rug of Australian news and politics. In the meantime, flick us an email, therealstory@novapodcast.com.au if you've got any questions, any criticisms. No, that's obviously hypothetical, as if you would. Or you can just jump onto Instagram, where I'm gramming with all my peeps, and @Joe_Hildebrand is my handle. If you want to slide into my DMs, you can have a chat to me, get plenty of interesting feedback there, all positive, of course, and some very funny and interesting comments. And of course, if you want to hear more of what I've got to say, you can read me every Monday and Saturday in the various News Corp mastheads, which are also owned by Rupert Murdoch. And that's all from me. I'll see you next week.